While I have the bike stripped back down again and the motor out of the bike, I can actually start the first part of the electrical installation, which is to replace the stator. Since I've purchased the race and ignition, it does recommend to replace the stator with a purely 12 volt stator like this one. So I've taken the motor off, the rear cover off, and so we have to remove the advancer coils. We no longer need the advancer coils. They are going to be replaced with the race and Hall effect sensor. So that Hall effect sensor is going to go in here like that, and the rotor will go in the middle of this, and we'll have to set that all up once it's back in the bike. So yeah, the advancer coils have to come out. We turn the cover over, and there's our original CDI stator with the two high voltage coils here. That these normally give problems. On this particular stator, one of these coils didn't meet the recommended ohm specs. You have the two trigger coils here as well. That's the right one and the left one. I'm going to leave the right trigger coil in the bike. I'm going to remove this one. I'm going to remove the stator. But you'll notice on the right trigger coil there is a pointer, and this does all your timing, and your timing's done through the inspection hole here. So I want to leave that in, and so yeah, the next thing is to get these components out. So we get this old stator out. It's a bit unfortunate that I didn't know that I had to replace this at the time I had the motor stripped, because it did mean me having to buy another expensive CX500 rear gasket again. But all's good. I'll get these coils out. A lot of the guys on the CX forum, they do remove both of these coils, and they make up a little template to do your timing. But for me, I just want to keep that bit original, you know. So yeah, the advancer coils, they unplug. That goes there. A neutral switch, and all of that feeds out of the rear cover. So here we have the original parts out of the CX500, 30-odd year old technology, the stator for charging, the high voltage coils for the CDI, the trigger coils, and the advancer coils. And here's the new system. The stator is just purely 12 volts for charging the battery. They do recommend with a lithium battery to change to a 12 volt stator, and we have the race and Hall effect sensor there to replace the advancer coils. I've installed the race-and components into the rear cover. Now, looking at the stator here, if I turn that over, I've got the cable in there, but I did have to move this bracket here from there to there, and I had to tap that hole out so that this lined up nicely into this groove here, and the cable runs around the outside of the housing. So I'll just line that up and get a bolt in there. I'll put a bit of Loctite on this bolt, and that can go in there. It's been very hot here in the shed this week in Adelaide. Actually, all of Australia is pretty well going through a heat wave. We've had a week of 40 odd degree, 45 degree plus heat this week, so it's been quite warm. So okay, got these bolts in, just tension them up. Okay, that's all nice and tight, tensioned correctly. Now I'll turn this over, and I've also fitted the Hall effect sensor in there, and what I did there was to remove the fitting here. And you just use a small screwdriver to get behind these little tangs, pull the wires out, fed that through the grommet here, and I can seal that up. I've just got a couple of cable ties holding there. But the cover, when you put the cover on, just be careful of this blade across here. So I've fed that around the bolts there, and that should fit on there quite easily. Turning it back over, I'm going to install the right hand trigger housing. Now I've taken the actual windings out of the housing. There were just a couple of rivets holding the coil in there, but yeah, you need this pointer in the engine to do your timing. So I'm going to put it back in on this one. So that goes in there like that. Bit of Loctite on that bolt as well. And install that in there. Okay, so there we have our pointer, so that we can do our timing. When we look into the through the hole, we can see that pointer. So to me, that's good. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We're ready to get that back on the back of the bike now. The next thing I have to fit is the rotor for the Hall effect sensor. Now it says to make a mark on the trailing edge of the magnet. So on the rear of the motor, we're going to be going in an anti-clockwise direction, so it's going around this way. So I've made a mark on the back edge of that magnet. So I put a bit of Loctite on this bolt, and I'm going to put that on the motor here. There we go there. Okay, next thing, get the cover on. I now have the rear cover back onto the engine. Stator's in place, and I now have the Raysan Hall effect sensor in position. That has been wired up to the battery, and it says in the instructions to be very careful how you actually wire it up. The green goes to the negative on the battery and the red goes to the positive. If you get these round the wrong way, you'll fry the Hall effect sensor. So just double check that to make sure that that's okay. The next thing to do is to crank the engine round the front to align the timing marks up so that the FR looking through the inspection hole is lined up. Then we'll loosen the screws off on the Hall effect sensor, and we can rotate this till the light comes on. Then we turn it until the light just goes off, like that. So back and then on. So, sorry, off. We just check that again, on, and the light's just going off. So we tighten our screws there. Okay, so now I'll just check the left one. So cranking around. And we come round to the left. Left one comes on, and that should just go off as the, whoops, I'll just move that back so I can check it. It's on. So just move around slowly till that light just goes out, and check the mark, and that is in a good position. So that's the timing done. Next the engine goes into the bike, and the control unit connects to the Hall effect sensor. Well, the motor is now back in the bike. I have connected the motor's well, it's pretty well connected up. Radiator is all connected, fluids are in the engine, all the linkages are on, done the braided lines for the front brakes, got my seat back. Really happy with the way Kevin at Auto and Marine Upholstery here in Adelaide done this seat. He's done a marvellous job, and really happy with it. So let's continue on with the installation of the Raysan ignition system. I'll take the seat off and have a look. So yeah, there's the seat there, you can have a closer look at it. But yeah, that came out really good, really happy with that. So inside I've wired up for the Moto Gadget M-Unit Blue, and we have the Raysan ignition module here. So I might just take the tank off and the side covers. Okay. So we have the M-Unit Blue here, the reins of the ignition system, electrical system, and the Raysan control module here. So we've done our Raysan Hall effect. That timing's been done on that. I've loosened the screws on the back of this so we can take this cover off, and we can have a look at, just recheck with the lights on the actual control unit. So I'll switch on the power. Power's from I'm powering this at the moment from the ignition switch. There's two sources for the M-Unit Blue. I've got the ignition switch, which is a good idea to wire in, and you also have your mobile phone to start the bike. So I'll turn the ignition on. You can see the M-Unit Blue just initializing. We have the lock input on here, and the brown wire is the ignition wire, which is powered up the ignition system. So we have from the controller unit, or we're going to the Hall effect on the back of the motor, and we've got our two 12-volt coils here. Now with the coils, we've got the brown wire on the top, which is basically coming back to the M-unit to provide switched 12-volt power to the dyno coil, and on the bottom I've got the red wires going to the on the right hand side it's the blue cable from the Raysan, on the left hand side it's the yellow cable. So they're providing power to the ignition coils, and I've just got just a little switch wired up here to act as the start switch. Okay, I've got the inspection cover off and got a ratchet there on the front, so I'll just rotate this motor around and we'll watch the lights in here. So we have the green light just coming on there. We're rotating around until my FR mark, or the light goes out. Right goes out there, and yes, my FR mark is still in the correct position. I continue around. The left light comes on. Wait till that light goes off, and the FL is lined spot on. So the ignition system is ready to go. I've got the carbies off at the moment to give me a bit of room in here, but once I've finished wiring, carbies will go back on and go for motor start. Okay, so now we can have a look at the rest of the wiring that I'm in the process of doing at the moment. I guess with wiring a motorcycle you can actually split it up into sort of modules to wire. Like you've got your starting circuit, we've already looked at the ignition circuit, we have the brains here of the M-Unit Blue, we've got all our instruments up front, and we've got all our sensors on the motor itself. So yeah, let's have a look at the starter circuit to start off with. We started off by putting the stator into the back of the motor. 3 yellow wires coming out of there into the voltage regulator rectifier. On the other side we have the red wire going through the main fuse on the solenoid to the battery. Now the other connection from there, which is on terminal 5 on this particular unit, went to the power for the M-Unit. Now I won't mention the company I got this off, but they're a reputable company and I trust what they say. I did ask why the M-Unit Blue power supply is a 6mm 40 amp cable. You know, it's a huge cable, and they recommended, well, in their installation instructions on terminal 5 to put a 12 gauge wire to power the M-Unit. Now I asked them why they'd gone to a smaller cable. Well, they couldn't understand why Moto Gadget had put such a huge cable in there, because everything would have to be on at the one time to actually achieve that amount of amperage. So yeah, I actually had already decided that I was going to provide a separate power using the original Moto Gadget cable through a 30 amp fuse, which is on the other side. I'll show you in a minute. So yeah, coming from the battery through a 30 amp fuse to power the M-Unit, and the number 5 on here, which is going through the main fuse. You've got your rectifier and the other connection here going through the main fuse I took that straight to the ignition switch. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the starter circuit. It's powered. When the ignition comes on, you'll see the M-Unit Blue initializers. The lock input comes on from the ignition switch, and the ignition is energized. So your ignition system now has switched power on it. So if I use this little switch to provide a start signal, which is the blue one, I can now crank this motor over. Over on the right hand side of the bike, we have the battery from the positive terminal coming out, going through the 30 amp blade fuse holder there and into the power supply for the M-Unit Blue. On the other cable, which is going round to the solenoid through the main fuse and powering the starter motor and the ignition switch, which is constant power. On the negative side, the main big cable is coming down onto the frame. That's all been ground back to a raw metal to give me a good ground. I've got one cable going to the base of the M-Unit Blue, and the other cable is going to the Raysan ignition module. Okay, just having a closer look at the M-Unit Blue, the brains of the outfit. Wired this up. All the outputs are here, they're all wired in. All the inputs are here and they're all wired in. Outputs going up this side of the bike, inputs going up this side. As I said before, got to wire up the front of the bike, speedo and all the switches and all the sensors on the motor. But I have wired up the back of the bike here. I've got a terminal strip there for my neutrals, and the tail light is a one-wire tail light. The M-Unit can just give more power when you hit the brake switch. The blinkers are on. So when we power up the bike, there's two methods. We can use the ignition switch, which is here, which is recommended to have an ignition switch and your phone, in case you forget your phone or something. Yeah, so ignition switch there, we turn the ignition switch on, M-Unit initializes, and the lock input comes on, and the ignition, the brown wire, ignition wire comes on and provides power, switched power to the Raysan ignition module. So at this point I could start the motor with a little switch, just start it, and you'll see the start, you might be able to see the start output come on there, or start input, sorry, here will come on, and the start output. You can start the motor up. The blinkers, when you look at them, all you've got really on this system is just your wire, your input wire going to the M-Unit, and all you have to do is earth that to bring the blinkers on. So this is the left blinker wire, so if I just touch that onto the blinker will come on. I touch it again and the blinker will go off. Same with the left. You do that, put the left on, left comes on, left goes off. We can, on the tail light, we can press the brake, and the brake will come on and off. With the light, you can just give that one touch, the light comes on, and it'll hold this for a second or two, and the light goes off. So yeah, pretty simple system really for the for a motorcycle, you know, to do away with a lot of the original wiring and all those connectors, which are problems for arcing out. So the other way, of course, of starting the bike is with your phone. We'll have a look at that. Okay, let's look at another way of starting the motorcycle and arming the M-Unit, and that is with your mobile phone. So I'm going to take the ignition key out of the bike. Ignition's off, keys in my pocket. So I then go to Bluetooth, make sure Bluetooth is on. And then I go to the M-Ride app, bring up the M-Ride app, and you will notice that the lock button on the M-Unit is now flashing. So the bike is armed, ready to go. Just sitting there. I walked up, had a coffee, come out of the bike, and the bike is sitting there waiting for me. So I go to the start button, and I press the start button once. I'll just give that a quick pulse.
M-Ride ready.
Now she's brought the ignition lock has now gone steady, and the ignition light is on. So now I just press the button again, and the bike starts. So when I walk away, the bike will disarm itself. So it's a brilliant unit, this Moto Gadget M-Unit Blue. Does away with a lot of the wiring on the old CX500. Yeah, very few of the bulky connectors that can give you connection problems. So yeah, the next stage is to get the carbies back on, get the front wired up, and get this baby running.